الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونشكره على ما هدانا ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتقين. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of here and the hereafter. We thank Him and we praise Him for the guidance that we receive from Him. We greet and salute our Holy Prophet, the most noble of all prophets, and his pure progenies. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, this month of fasting is going to be a blessed one. We have grown used to the idea of asking everyone, please, during the month of Ramadan, as well as before and after, to pay attention to their health and well-being. So as much as possible, sisters and brothers, stay at home. We began our first program for the month of Ramadan this year, 2020. The program is meant to be tafsir of the Holy Quran, but obviously it's not going to be purely tafsir. It's going to be addressing other issues as well. And last night we started by giving some intro into what we really need to do, a number of issues that we covered. So if we do a recap for the benefit to refresh the mind and for the benefit of those who may not have been watching the program last night, we talked about the importance of Quran in our lives. We also discussed the revelation, when it started and when it ended, and the two phases of the revelation, which is the Mecca phase and the Medina phase. We also mentioned briefly about the compilation of the Holy Quran and the scribes, although there are debates as exactly how many numbers. And we indicated the most important factor in the importance of Quran for the Muslims is because Quran is considered to be a book of action. And one or two hadith regarding this issue was discussed. Tonight, I want to start in earnest by going to Surah Al-Nas, which is the last chapter of the Holy Quran. But it is important that I would address one more issue before we move further. One of the long-standing objections against the Quran by non-Muslim critique is what they call the apparent, it appears to have no regular form or structure. They claim its verses follow one another with little sense of interconnectedness. And its surahs seems to have been arranged in a sequence based on the crude principle of diminishing length. If we start, although it's not correct, but at least the beginning, if we were to remove Surah Al-Hamd, we start with the longest surah in the Holy Quran. And the longest, the coming first, and the shorter ultimately going to the last. The surahs are riddled with what they claim to be shifting scenes, and as a result, one cannot predict what is coming next. This type of critique emanates from the mindset or the lens that most of these non-Muslim scholars have against Islam, that they come from the Judo-Christian background. And with regard to the Judo-Christian background, the four Gospels in the New Testament and even the Pentateuch is structured after the destruction of the temple for the Jews and the destruction of the tablets, and for the Christians. It specifically starts with, say, life of the whole, from the moment that he departs from Galilee until he comes to Jerusalem, and various other aspects, and ultimately, according to them, the crucifixion. So it's a degree of predictability and continuity exists. When they come to the Holy Quran, they don't see that kind, because it's a book of history. That's the fundamental problem. It's a book of history. And when they come to the Holy Quran, they don't see that kind of a pattern replicated. This is why they say that their critique starts. I don't want to go into detail and respond to it, but broadly speaking, we have two types of answers given to these critiques. One that I call apologetic. They say that yes, they admit to a degree that yes, there is a degree, might appear to be a degree of inconsistency, but Quran wasn't meant to have some kind of order, because the revelation took place over 23 years period and had to deal with different circumstances, different contexts, and different people. And this long span of the 23 years necessitates not having any particular order, because these verses came to and were revealed most of the times to deal with the specific issues. This issue, and the second group of people, they respond to this in a methodological way, in which, no, they reject the question rather than admitting that there is lack of consistency or coherence. They reject it, and they go about proving their own, developing a systematic approach or systematic response. This group responds to the first group of people from the Muslim community and the Mufassirins as well, that it is inconsistent. And we talked yesterday briefly that Quran for us is the living miracle. And it is inconsistent to have any higher literature without coherence. We cannot say that Quran is a living miracle. It's strange to acknowledge that Quran is a living miracle, the pinnacle of eloquence and elegance, and yet at the same time, on another hand, say that there is no some kind of no coherence, and the texts are somehow random without having any eloquence here. The lack of eloquence and coherence in the verses that put together is rejected by this group, and informed, the other group are informed that this is not acceptable because it's contradictory. If there was no coherence in the Holy Quran, then how do we explain the prophetic command of putting various verses into different chapters, even if they were revealed after? The arrangement, this might have happened in a chronological order in which the revelation took place if there was no coherence. We start Quran with Surah Al-Alaq, and then we move forward. The special instruction of the Holy Prophet to arrange these verses into different chapters clearly indicates the Prophet ﷺ was following a particular coherence and order. Otherwise, it would have been meaningless. It could have been the criteria of quantitative arrangement, where we start with the longest and then we bring to the shortest. So in this case, we have to start with Surah Al-Baqarah rather than Surah Al-Hamd. Then we go to Surah Shu'ara, and then we go to A'raf, and then we go to Al Imran, and in the same manner as the number of verses in the Holy Quran gets shorter, then we put them next to each other. It simply does not make sense. So they have come to accept or claim that there is a coherence in the Holy Quran, and the verses follow a particular pattern, and there is a logic to it. They have come up with elaborate system that would to support and to justify their position. First of all, they reject the classic approach to the tafsir of Quran, where Mufassirin looked at each surah independent of the other. And they claim that these surahs are independent, which was the classic approach. They say the weaving of a number of basic principles. Number one, each Quranic surah has a dominant idea or theme called the axis of that surah, and which the verses within this surah somehow revolve around that axis. Surahs of the Quran stand in pairs, complementing each other. Sometimes few Makki surahs pairing up with few Madani surahs. The 114 chapters can be divided into 7 groups based on the theme that these chapters contain. And each group contains both Makkis and Madani surahs. Each group leads to, logically leads to each other, to the next one. And each surah targets, or each group targets a particular audience, and the content of these surahs, which constitute the central theme of these surahs, directed towards the specific audience that the surah is supposed or meant to deal with. So what are these 7 groups of people? They say group 1 starts with Surah Al-Fatiha and ends with Surah Al-Ma'idah. The central theme is Islamic law. Group 2 starts with Surah An'am and ends with Surah Tawbah. And the central theme here, consequence of denying the prophethood for the mushrikeen of Mecca. Remember yesterday, as we were discussing this issue, the chapters, the Makki chapters, were quite clearly centered on the fundamental principle that Islam came to challenge with the Jahili mindset. Number one was the 3 major issues of Tawheed, Nubuwwah, and Ma'ad. So it's not strange for the second group of surahs to have the central theme as the prophethood and the consequence for the Mecca mushrikeen. Group 3, the central theme, glad tidings of the prophet's domination in Arabia, again part of prophethood and ultimately success of Islam. It starts with Surah Yunus and ends with Surah Nur. Group 4 starts with Surah Furqan and ends with Surah Ahzab. The central theme, argument substantiating the prophecy of the Prophet and requirement of the faith in him. We still remaining within the 3 fundamental principles of Tawheed, Nubuwwah, and Ma'ad. Group 5 goes back to central theme, starts with Surah Saba, chapter 34, and ends with Hujurat, chapter 49. Argument about the centrality of Tawheed in any society that the Holy Prophet is trying to organize, in Islamic society. Group 6, starting with Surah Qaf, number 50, and ending with Tahrim 66. Central theme here, the centrality of the belief in the hereafter, Ma'ad, and that ultimately the Day of Judgment, Everyone has to stand up and be accountable for what they have done. Group 7 starts with the 64th chapter, Al-Mulk, and ultimately ends with Surah Al-Nas, the last 114. The central theme, admonishing Quraysh about their fate in the hereafter. And if they were to persist denying of the prophethood of the Holy Prophet and accept the message and fall in order. So these are the 7 various groups that they claim to exist in the Holy Quran. We can spend a night or two discussing the validity of such a claim, or how much truth in it, how broadly or specifically they fit into context of the 7 groups. And some people have come up with 9 groups. But for the sake of argument, this is how they respond. So number 1, first response to the Muslim scholars that somehow have been apologetic in responding to the critique of the non-Muslim scholars or criticism against Quran, by reminding them that we really have to be consistent. On the one hand, if we claim Quran to be the living miracle, the pinnacle of eloquence, then we cannot go back and claim that there is no coherence and order within the various chapters of the Holy Quran. But when it comes to responding to the external critique, which is the non-Muslim critique, they have developed this elaborate system that they say, no, there is, if you really pay attention. The reason why you don't see it, because first of all, you are blinded by the lens, the Judeo-Christian lens. And number 2, you really have no knowledge about the revelation of Quran, the background and how it was revealed, and how the verses were put in and structured and ordered. So these are the response. Now we go to addressing Surah Al-Nas, which is the last chapter of the Holy Quran, 114. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. If you look at and if you pay attention, if you bear in mind the discussion that we had last night, and I briefly touched upon it, it's an early Meccan surah that was revealed in Mecca. These 2, Surah Al-Nas and Surah Al-Falaq, they seem to be complementing each other, and we, inshallah, if there is life left till tomorrow night, we will be able to address Surah Al-Falaq. They work together and complement each other. In this surah, an appeal has been made to us, human beings, especially against if you want to protect yourself, a sure shield and against any evil, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that we have to go and turn to, which is similar in theme to Surah Al-Falaq. Protection, it warns us against the secret whisperers of evil within our own heart. The first question that we have, the classic approach to the tafsir of Quran, starting from Surah Al-Hamd and moving towards Surah Al-Baqarah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim becomes an issue that everybody discusses. And the first point, again here, whether Bismillah is part of the surah or it is not. This is one of the classic debate between Mufassirin or exegetes, the Sunni scholars and the Shia scholars. This belief comes in the recitation of Hamd and Surah. In most Sunni school of thoughts, they consider Bismillah not to be part of the surah. This is why when you stand behind an imam that follows, say, Hanafi, Maliki, or Shafi or Hanbali school of thought, particularly the Wahhabis, they say Allahu Akbar, slight silence, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, where Bismillah is not recited. Although there is a debate as to whether the Shafi'is accept this to be part of the surah or not, but generally speaking, the Sunnis, Sunni community collectively does not consider Bismillah to be part of the surah. But the Shias, on the other hand, they consider this, citing a number of ahadith from the Holy Prophet, Ahlul Bayt, and others, clearly indicating that Bismillah is an essential part of the surah. This is why we cannot read any surah within the prayer without including Bismillah in it. We cannot read Surah Al-Hamd without Bismillah in it. We cannot read any other surahs without Bismillah in it. So this is the number one. But because we are starting literally from the short surah, I had to mention this. And anybody who has access to tafsirs, whether Tafsir al-Mizan in English translation or any other, you can go and look at the debate based on the jurisdictional point as well as the tafsir point, that the debate exists. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. In the language of Quran, the command قُلْ is used when Quran or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to seal the conversation and indicates that there has been a lengthy debate about the issue, and we have reached the point that we as Muslims have to state our position. We see this repeatedly around the end of the Quran and in a number of other verses in the Holy Quran. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. Now, no more discussion. This is where our position is. We seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we use some of His attributes to protect us. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. The same thing. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Probably one of the most important surahs in the Holy Quran, as the one that unpacks and develops truly the concept of Tawheed. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. And a number of other verses in the Holy Quran that the Holy Prophet is commanded to say by this قُلْ. Amr. Command, say. So all the discussion, all the debate from a Quranic point of view or from Allah's point of view is finished. This is our position, literally. You want to take it or leave it. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. Say that I take refuge in the... Now we have three issues, three attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being used to ask for protection. Number one, the Rabb, which is the God or the Lordship. I seek refuge to the Lord, the Maker, the Cherisher, the Sustainer, the Provider, and the Protector against evil. Malik al-Nas. Now here God in His rulership, or in God's rulership and authority to guide human conduct and lead humans to the right path by providing them laws where we have to follow these laws, the commands. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. God as He to whom we ultimately return and we answer for our deeds and action during our life. So these three are used. All these aspects we should use to ask and seek protection against what? قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. Then comes the central theme of this chapter. مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ. From the evils who somehow whisper in our heart. Whisper and seek protection against those evil within our own hearts. So this is something that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take refuge. Whisper in our heart, and then what happens? ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. From both the jinn and ins. Here, I really need to elaborate a little bit about the distinction about jinn and ins. Although later on, inshallah, as we move towards other chapters within the Holy Quran, that gives much more precedent and focuses on the concept of creation, and particularly the different types of creation. Jinn and ins, the differences between them will be elaborated. The classic approach was, when you ask anyone, and I have repeatedly been asked to answer question, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created 3 different types of beings. One was called jinn, the other one was called ins, and the third category was called malaika. That classic approach, in my humble opinion, is misunderstanding of the reality, because then people would come back and ask question whether malaika commit sins and they have shortcomings or not. So how do we respond to it? There much more eloquent approach these days to divide the creation into 2 parts: the seen and the unseen. The unseen are somehow categorized or labeled as jinn, and the seen is categorized and labeled as ins, or this reality of the world that we live in. The creme de la creme of the creation within the ins part is human being. The major creation within the unseen are the jinns. However, that there are 3 different categories that human will be classified or labeled or signified or distinguished under, if we were to follow nafs al-ammara, nafs al-lawwama, and nafs al-mutma'inna. In the same manner, the jinn can follow nafs al-ammara and sink to the lowest possible level. As Quran says, in asfal as-safilin, they then become shaitan. Under normal circumstance, where they are obligated to follow the command, and they have free will similar to human being, and they follow the command of Allah, or they somehow abuse their free will and make mistakes and commit sins, they are still remain signification of jinn. And when ultimately they become nafs al-mutma'inna, within that category of the unseen, they become malaika. When we consider this kind of distinction, then malaika, shaitan, as jinn, can reach the ultimate goal of becoming similar to becoming malaika, in the same manner that insan, by following the command of Allah and gaining ultimately the nafs al-mutma'inna, becomes the example of hadith Qudsi. Abdi ata'ni, aj'aluka mathali, ana aqul kun fayakun, wa anta taqul kun fayakun. O my servant, follow me. And the concept of a servant covers both, by the way, the jinn and the ins. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, to submit and to follow the command. So follow the command, and you will reach that ultimate status, that in the same manner that inherently it is part of my attribute to command be, and there will be, I grant you some of that privilege. Now, 2 groups of people. The unseen are the malaikas that are granted that privilege, and the seen are granted the privilege. The Holy Prophet becomes Al-Insan Al-Kamil, the embodiment of the all, the typifies perfection. And we say in the jinn part, Archangel Jibreel probably gets close to that. So here, instead of saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created 3 different types of being, insan, jinn, and malaika, then have to somehow grapple with the notion that whether malaika can commit sins or not, or they are pure by design, which doesn't say much about them. This kind of designation of classification of first seen and the unseen. Jinns are categories that fall within the designation of the unseen, because from an Arabic point of view, technically Jannah means when something is unseen and becomes hidden. This is why Janeen, where we have the baby in the womb, is called that used under that category because it's not visible. إذا جن عليه الليل, when the night covers and that person or a particular thing becomes unseen. So jinn as a category is referred to the unseen creation of Allah. We have a number of ahadith that both jinn and ins are similar to each other, apart from the distinction of being seen and or not seen, or visible or not visible. They all have free will. You look at Surah Al-Jinn in the Holy Quran, where they come and listen to the Holy Prophet, and they go back to their community, explaining to the community, we have heard a new message that requires us to submit to the command of Allah. And some of us, in the same manner that we have within the ins, some of us are going to follow the command, and some of us are going to disobey. That command, that choice, free will exists in the jinn. There is a hadith, khutbah in Nahj al-Balagha, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi, when tries to explain to the community that Allah on the day of judgment is not going to let go of individuals that did not submit to Him and violated that trust for a sin that a malaika was kicked out of heaven, which was shaitan. In that khutbah, Amir al-Mu'mineen refers to shaitan before the fall as malaika. See how now the relationship and the synthesis between these two, seen and the unseen. Rather than say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created 3 unique and distinct reality, Allah has created 2 types of reality, the visible and the invisible. The invisible, from a technical point of view within Islam, we call them jinn. How they elevate themselves by submitting, and or how they drop and fall to asfal as-safilin, the path, the journey is similar to the ins and human being. And hence, now going back to Surah An-Nas, min al-jinnati wan-nas, both parties, both the seen and the unseen, can become the major part of creating mischief and waswasa in the heart of the believers or the ordinary people. So shaitan, it's part of his technique. Shaitan here represents the jinn that has dropped to asfal as-safilin. In the same manner that Quran uses the language, kal-an'am bal hum adall, that the human being, despite all the moral plan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had for human being to become the vicegerents of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, despite all the elevated status, we fall due to our own free will. To the point that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala metaphorically uses the language that we fall even below the beast. So when jinn falls below the beast, it becomes shaitan. When humans fall below, asfal as-safilin. Each of these three categories, there are possibility of collaboration and cooperation. So now we have possibilities in which good jinns assisting the good human being, and we have in the Battle of Badr, which was the beginning of the month of Ramadan, year 2 after Hijrah, the verses in the Holy Quran clearly specifies and spells this out, that we send malaika. Who are these malaikas to support you? It was the jinns that they had elevated themselves through submission to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yet, there are instances that Quran talks about that there are some jinns collaborating or cooperating with those who have been sinful, the fallen individuals, in creating mischief. So, min sharr al-waswas al-khannas, from the evil of the waswas al-khannas, which is the technical term referred to shaitan, that these techniques, luring people through deception or deceptive promises and playing with their mind. Khannas, technically in Arabic language, used for when somebody comes forward and encourages you to do something, and then you commit, then that person, you suffer the consequences, that person stays back and does not support. كمثل الشيطان إذ قال للإنسان اكفر فلما كفر قال إني بريء منك. We have shaitan encourages human being to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their Lord. Once they do it, and they have to suffer the consequences and stand before Allah and answer back, he steps back and he's not prepared to support and help. This is khannas. Even on the day of judgment, ما كان لي عليكم من سلطان إلا أن دعوتكم فاستجبتم. Surah Ibrahim. When the debate starts on the day of judgment, humans stand up and say, well, oh Lord, shaitan was the one who misguided us. Shaitan says, I really had no power on you to force you and remove your free will and agency. What I did, I simply called you. This is the waswasa. I called you, and deceptive promises. Even Prophet Adam fell for this deceptive promise. I called you through deceptive promises, but you responded. I really did not force you to do it. ما كان لي عليكم من سلطان إلا أن دعوتكم. I called you and you responded. So من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. So both the seen and the unseen can cooperate with each other to create this deceptive waswasa and a mindset that ultimately, so long as we live in the nafs al-ammara state of our life, we fall victim for it. The material life, the glamour of life becomes too alluring for us to resist. But it doesn't mean that the agency has been removed. We still are the agent. This is why we're still being questioned. Once we are able to move away, and this is hopefully the month of fasting that we are supposed to focus upon, as I have said it in various lectures before. Once we are able to begin fasting, not a purely basic fast that we remove the juristical responsibility or the jurisprudential responsibility, the order of fast, that simply refrain or restrain from eating and drinking and few other things. If we move away from that and we begin to develop a plan in which the fast begins to change our life, even if it's not substantially, reasonably, where the life in and the life out will not be the same. then we have succeeded during this month. And this is the period that we really need to pay attention to it. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us. It's really a struggle. Jihad al-nafs, as the Holy Prophet said, when a battalion of the Muslims came back from an ordinary jihad against the mushrikeen, he said this was the small jihad that you succeeded. But the larger jihad, Jihad al-Akbar, is in front of you. And they asked, what was Jihad al-Akbar? He said, the struggle against ego and releasing yourself from the shackle of nafs al-ammara that dictates a life to you that ultimately you don't submit to the command of Allah, and on the day of judgment you have to answer back. Let's all pray together first for the help that we really need and the guidance that we really need to receive from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to stay on the right path. We also, as it has become a habit for us during these difficult times and challenging times, to ask everyone to pray for the sake, for the health and the safety of everyone within our community, irrespective of what's their religious background or orientation. As long as they have felt responsible to stand before and shield us from the harm, we owe them a debt. And the least we can do is to offer and to help to pray for their safety and their well-being. Let's pray during the month of Ramadan, where inshallah the door to heaven